Santos. I am from head office at Cooperators. I'm a strategic client manager. What that means is I work at corporate level for helping non-for-profits, cooperatives across Canada, and our member organizations, commonly referred to as our member owners, be more resilient, helping them impact their communities. And today with me, I have Ben Anders. Ben is a financial advisor representing the West region of Canada. He's going to be helping us go through the presentation. I also have Sharon Kovacic. Sharon is another financial advisor in Ontario, covering mostly of the eastern part of Canada. And with me as well, I have the pleasure to have Ian Fraser. Ian is the AVP Cyber and Technology and Professional Lines at the Sovereign Insurance. So Sovereign is one of the organizations that Cooperators owns in their structure. And Ian is fantastic to work with, and he's ready to answer the various questions that we might have regarding cyber for sure. So thank you very much for attending today, and I'm going to pass it on to Jan from here. And thank you again.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for the introduction, and welcome to everyone that has come today to join us for this call. Just before we get started, we'd like to do our customary land acknowledgement. And we would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility on improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home and whose footsteps have marked the land for centuries. We strive to be accountable by acknowledging the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and we can each in our own way try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So I have the distinct pleasure of kicking this presentation off for everyone on the call today to really speak to the overall agenda of what we're seeking to accomplish. We are honored to have some great presenters today to present these topics to you all. And I echo the introduction that this is meant to be a very informative session for everyone. And although the topics can get a little bit complex as we get through it, by all means, please do mark down your questions, any questions you might have about the subject matter that we're doing, or even contextually how it might apply to the organizations in which you work within. And use the question portal that is available through the webinar, or using the email address that was provided at the kickoff. So once again, Ian Fraser. I am the head of Tech Cyber Professional Lines for one of the operating entities of Cooperators. And I love talking to you guys about everything cyber related. It is core to what I do. Today with the agenda, we have a few things we're going to get through. So cyber is a risk. We're going to talk about the state of the market and emerging trends. We're going to briefly talk about cyber coverages and what they mean. So there's a lot of terms and terminology that is used in the context of cyber insurance and cyber risk. We're going to go through that and explain it. We're going to speak about the anatomy of a cyber event, and this is really interesting because it really gets to the numbers that are attributable to a cyber event, the quantum. The amounts that are typically incurred by an organization, whether they have insurance or not, but really understand the severity of a cyber event that could breach your organization. We're briefly going to touch on changes to privacy legislation and the responsibilities as a result of that privacy legislation change that falls on the owners or the senior representatives of an organization. And then lastly, we're going to talk about key exposures, really that any organization could have from a cyber perspective, whether you're in the private industry or in the nonprofit segment, and really speak to try to highlight some of the mitigative risk management techniques that can be used to drive mitigation of cyber exposure and get everyone fundamentally in a better position from a cyber risk perspective. So we'll start with speaking about state of the market, and I'll pass on to Sharon to get us kicked off.
Thank you so much, Ian. So starting off with the emerging trends, what we're seeing, what we tend to see today is that the larger companies that were targeted, it's shifting a bit to more to the small to the medium-sized enterprises that are being targeted for cyber attacks. We're finding this mainly due to the convenience and the function versus the security. I think the larger companies, maybe they're anticipating it a bit more, but the security is in place, whereas with the smaller to medium size, probably not as much. And so we're certainly seeing that trend where we're going to the small to the medium size corporations, nonprofits that are being targeted. Ultimately, what they're looking to gain is your consumer data. So whether it's the consumer NPIs, they're looking to gain data that they can use from the cyber attack. What we're finding is that the cyber attacks have increased 105% since 2020, that's 2 years ago. We're finding that there's about 623 million attacks globally. This has tripled from 2019. So certainly this is an area where we're seeing a lot more claims. There is a lot more attacks, and as you can see from the figures on from this slide. What ultimately happens is when we're seeing that there's more claims happening, of course, it puts us into a hard market. What that means typically is that we're seeing, I guess, more claims than we're anticipating. There's a whole lot more claims happening, which is affecting your premiums, which is no good for any of us. So that is what we're seeing in terms of the trends. The type of attacks we're seeing, we're going to move to slide 5. So this slide, it's a little overwhelming when you take a first look. So by all means, at the end of the presentation or when it's sent to you, do take a look. Once you have a minute to review the slide, it's a little bit more simple than it appears. If you look at the quadrants, basically what this slide is telling you for cybersecurity threats, on the radar, there's 4 areas that we're seeing threats. That is your technology, human, data, and environment. The blue squares on the top right-hand corner basically tells you the size and the frequency of the losses. So the closer you get to the center, of course, there's more losses that we're seeing. What we're seeing an increase in cyber threats right now is the CEO frauds, which is a big one that's happening often. Ransomware, of course, which is the one that you hear, that's the word you hear quite often when it comes to cyber attack. And again, large versus medium size, where the trends are starting to go towards the medium, smaller type corporations, but it's quite overwhelming. But take a look, and it's basically just giving you a heads up as to where we're seeing the trends happening. Moving to slide 6. So of course we're getting you have the threat of the cyber. You have the cyber threats. You need to get protection. So from the insurance perspective, we pretty much offer 3 types of coverages. You've got your privacy, liability, and network security. And basically that is protecting your consumer information, all their identifiable information, so the credit card numbers, medical information, names and addresses. Under that coverage, those are the protections you're getting. The second one is your electronic media liability. And I think that is self-explanatory in terms of it's any sort of wrongful publication that you might put out there, any defamation, any invasion of privacy, any copyright type claims is where you're going to have that coverage. And lastly is the regulatory proceedings coverage. So as Ian touched on, there's a lot of legislation in place that says if there is a cyber attack, you have responsibility in what you do, how you report it, notifying everybody else. So that coverage is in place for that reason. And I believe that is it for me until slide 10.
All right, team, so we're going to move to slide 7. So Sharon was talking about third-party coverages. So that's basically, you know, when somebody comes and sues you or they're asking for certain things. On the other side, there's first-party coverages. So that would be, you know, privacy breach expenses, cyber extortion, digital asset, and business interruption coverage. I'm not sure. Can you guys see the slide? Yeah. So that's the slide we're on. Beautiful. So privacy breach is, it's pretty self-explanatory, but we'll reimburse you for costs that you incur as a result of the breach. This includes expenses for credit monitoring, data recovery, cyber investigation, and crisis management. We'll move to the second column there, and that's cyber extortion. So this coverage is triggered when an individual receives a threat from an extortionist, and this is where they, you know, demand, you know, they can often demand money or something of value to either, you know, not attack the insured's computer system or release confidential information that you may have, you know, stored within your guys' servers or within your website. The next coverage is digital assets, right? So this helps cover costs for, you know, the breach. It can help pay for data recovery, restoration, you know, recollection of things that have been altered, corrupted, destroyed, disrupted, deleted, or damaged items. This can include, you know, reinstallation of software or other information that you're storing electronically. And then finally, we get to business interruption. So this is, this occurs when a company has a loss as a result of a breach. Covered losses include net profit before taxes and extra expenses arising out of the interruption. So we'll move on to slide 8 there, and we'll really get into the anatomy of a cyber event, right? So, you know, it's pretty stunning to look at the numbers, but, you know, the average cost for a breach in Canada is about $4.74 million, okay? And 50% of these breaches are caused by malicious or criminal attacks. So cyber extortion, ransomware, and hacking are real big business. Like I said, we're up significantly even in the last 2 years, and we're seeing a lot more of this, right? Another thing to keep an eye on is, you know, look at those numbers. It takes generally 181 days to identify a breach. That's significant. And then on top of that, you've got another 69 days to actually contain that breach, right? So the numbers are pretty staggering, right? The average cost to get, you know, the average cost per record lost or stolen is about $202, and I'll really jump into that. But $86 of that's direct and $116 that's indirect. So you may ask, what's a direct versus indirect? Well, direct cost involves the amount to accomplish engaging forensic experts, hiring law firms, offering victims identity protection services. Indirect costs are, you know, how much time have you allotted to each employee to recover this? The effort to notify victims, investigate the breach. These are all indirect costs, but they also can, you know, cause a big concern in regards to, you know, goodwill within your company, right? So it's restoring that faith in you once a breach has happened. I am going to move on to slide 9, and these are the factors that impact a cost of a breach. Not going to get into every single one of them. I just really want to touch on some of the big ones. So factors that factors that impact the cost of a breach. First, I'm going to go into like the favorable ones. So you can do, these are the top 3 things that you can do to, you know, help limit the impact to your organization if something's to happen. So the number one thing is an incident response team, right? And that's right up there at the very top. This includes a well-defined incident response plan, knowing what resources you have, where they are, how they're backed up, and what you guys do first if you have to go offline, okay? The second one's employee training that I'll talk to you about. So it's a couple down there. So knowing the exposures, so letting your employees know what exposures they may face, right? How to spot them. A lot of people will roll their eyes when they get these privacy breach training things, but they're so vitally important to make sure you're doing them so you recognize the newest stuff that's out and about, okay? And then really board involvement, right? So get your board involved. A culture of cyber exposure really creates an awareness throughout the organization. It's kind of a top-down effect. If you guys make it a priority in your board, you know, that's going to filter down to everybody within the organization. That makes everybody more aware. And in the end, that's going to help, you know, impact or even prevent a breach, right? Cost adding things, so unfavorable things. As soon as you get a third party involved in the process, that's going to raise costs significantly, right? So the more outside influence you have, the higher the cost is going to become, right? Because then you need to, you know, get media involved and a lot of those other third parties, right? And then compliance failures is also a big one, right? So not having a compliance framework or having compliance or not even testing, right? So having a compliance failures are a big one because if you're not testing for breaches, you don't know what you're up against. So I'm going to move on to slide 10 and Sharon's going to take over again and thank you.
Hey, Sharon. Are we having any trouble with your unmuting?
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries, it happens.
So back over to me on how best to protect yourself. So let's start that again. So again, with a lot of nonprofits, I mean, you've got a lot of client data. If you're receiving donations, you've got a lot of financial data as well. So the one thing you want to make sure you have in place is your IT security. So testing, updated service packs and system updates, and as Ben touched on, the user training on security. And we all roll our eyes, yes, even we get it, and it's like, and I got caught the other day. We did cyber training, and then I got a phishing email, and yeah, I was caught. So those trainings is absolutely vital for your employees. And then you just want to have a healthy balance between the risk and convenience. Of course, being prepared. We all know it's happening out there now. We're hearing a lot more cyber attacks. As the numbers showed in the previous slides, they're increasing year over year. We're seeing an increase in cyber attacks. So you want to make sure that you are ready. You want to make sure that you have your pieces in place that you need to. And then, of course, the third part of that, Ben touched on a lot, and I touched on earlier as well, is the insurance coverages that are out there to protect you on when there is a breach. And even just with walking through your obligations of what it is you need to do, you want to make sure that you have that in place. Moving on to slide 11. I'm not sure if there's a delay. I'll just wait for the slide to change on my end, and then we'll get it.
There is an issue with the slide for some reason, so hopefully we can have that fixed in a minute. I'm just going to unshare and we can see if that will help.
Okay, perfect. Did you want me to continue or should I wait? I guess I'll wait.
Are you able to see that now, Sharon?
I am. I'm good to go. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so as we all know, there is legislation in place to make sure that we're doing the right thing to protect our clients, our donors, our clients. So the Privacy Act, of course, governs and protects the federal government and how they collect and use your information. You've got your Freedom of Information and Privacy Protection Act, and then you've got your Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. So that governs how the private sector collects and uses your personal information. So basically all our information, how is it used once it's collected by an organization, your Digital Act, and then you've got your Provincial Privacy Acts as well, which is in Alberta, BC, and Quebec, and they have the equivalents as well, but every province have the acts in terms of what the requirements are. Now, moving to slide 12.
Unfortunately, we are experiencing technical difficulties again, so I will just be pulling up the PDF version of the slide deck now. Sorry, Sharon.
No problem.
Are you able to see the slide deck now, Sharon?
I am, so just 12.
Great, okay.
Thanks everyone for your patience on that, and thanks to Mercedes for doing a little quick troubleshooting there. It's great.
Beautiful, thank you so much. So the mandatory notice requirements, so with the legislations comes, of course, guidelines in place in terms of when there is an attack, what is your requirement, what do you need to do? So when do you have to notify? It's deemed in case of a real risk of significant harm has been found. Any malicious attacks increases this factor versus the employee error type situations. And to whom do you have to report? To the Privacy Commission or any other governing bodies that are required. How can notification take place? By email, by phone, by letter, with a third-party mailing or call center, or even like for the larger cyber attacks, you've seen the broad media notifications that there's been a compromise of your data. So depending on what it is, and depending on who it is, you certainly are obligated. And as part of your coverage as well, if you are to carry the cyber insurance insurance coverage as well, we would help you with that in terms of, determining what it is you need to do. And of course, the notification has to be as soon as feasibly possible for you to get that notification out, so that your clients, your donors are aware that there was a breach of their information. And I think that is the end of my slide.
Beautiful, thanks, Sharon. So now we're going into top trending threats and exposures. Social engineering is probably the most common attack vector for any threat that you're going to receive. So in these slides, we've highlighted the 6 most common methods, but these are constantly evolving. So even next year, these slides may show very different because they continue to get better. Keep in mind, social engineering's attack can result in unauthorized financial transactions, privacy breach, leaked credentials that provide access to networks, ransom, reputational risk. These are all significant things that we are seeing in the industry. So what are the top threats? Let's go into phishing. So you'll see that's the blue side there. So those are, you've probably got used to these. These are emails sent under false pretenses. Sometimes you'll get one from Amazon or eBay, and it says log in here. So what they're trying to do is get you to click and then put in your credentials, and then they've got your logins, they've got your password, and then they've got access to a lot of personal information, right? Spear phishing, it's just even more targeted. So, you know, that's even going deeper. So that's coming, you know, that's posing as someone possibly in your organization, and it's kind of directly focused on you as an individual. Vishing is a significant thing. You can see even in the orange there, UK banks lost over 21 million pounds alone from vishing tax in 2014, and these are just getting more advanced. So this is when a person calls and pretends to be an IT supervisor or your CEO, or, you know, and they're just trying to pump you for information so they can use that for an attack later. Schmishing, well, I mean, you know, I would imagine most of us have seen these. It's where you get kind of a text message and it says, hey, deposit your money, you've only got 12 hours. And again, they're looking for you to click, put in your login information, and give them that info so they can access your system. So don't let you do that. You know, always do your due diligence before you start clicking some of these things. I'm going to get you guys to move on to the next slide there, and we'll go through the kind of the last two, right? So another big social engineering threat is mining social media, right? So learning more about you through what you put out there into the world, right? And that builds them, that helps them build a lot more phishing lures or make these attacks very personal to you, right? So I think you see, if you look at that mining social media part, between 2 million and 97, between 2 million or 52 million, sorry, and 97 million Facebook accounts are fake or duplicate accounts. That is a mind-blowing number, right? So when you add that person that you don't really know, you know, it is something that you maybe want to think about next time, right? So just do your due diligence, you know, try and ask your friends if you see a duplicate account from them coming up. Hey, why is this new account here, right? Because they're just looking for information for you, right? And then the last one is man in the browser attack. So that's basically they insert something between you and your browser, and they're trying to get that information, right? So it's basically the same principle as man in the middle. So what can we do to protect ourselves? Delete any requests for personal information or passwords. Reject requests for help for unsolicited offers. So if somebody's calling you from IT, you know, that's a good, you know, that's a good indication it might not be, you know, really your IT. Generally speaking, you reach out to them, or, you know, it comes out through a broader spectrum, you know, from the top down up. So again, building that culture within your guys' organization to be aware of cyber threats is super important. Set your spam filters high in your email, but also make sure you're checking those spam folders, because a lot of, you know, they do a good job. And again, these are also increasing and also getting better, but it's not perfect. So sometimes some important emails can still end up in your spam. So just make sure when you do increase those spam filters, make sure you're checking to make sure that, you know, something that's important is not getting lost there. Secure your devices, right? Update them, consider a VPN. You know, I know with cooperators, when I check my email, you know, I have to be logged into the VPN, and my phone needs to be updated in order for me to get the information, right? Because we need to protect that information. So I will get into that, but just making sure all your browsers and everything's up to date, and continually patching your software. And just always be mindful, right? We've discussed this before, but you know, it really does start with a culture. So just be mindful of those risks. These are the top 6 right now, but who knows what comes next, right? So just continue education, super important. I'm gonna get you guys to move to the next slide here. And we're gonna go through the top mitigation techniques. So these are the top ways that we can prevent, you know, these cyber hacks, or, you know, cyber attacks from happening. So first, I'm going to go on the top line of the architecture. So this is, you know, really the baseline of protecting your organization, right? So The first one is intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. They're slightly different. An intrusion detection system monitors traffic on your network. It analyzes that traffic for signatures matching known attacks. And then when something suspicious happens, it alerts you. In the meantime, the traffic keeps going. The other version is the intrusion prevention system, which once it finds that thing and something's off, it'll stop the traffic altogether and wait for you to decide to open the floodgates again and keep going. The next thing is multi-factor authentication. So, you know, you'll see this coming in more and more. You know, when's the last time you logged into your online banking on your phone? You know, I know for me specifically, I put in my, you know, my password, and then bing, I get, you know, a 7 or 8 digit code that I need to put in there. That's becoming more and more common, and that is an excellent way to continue to protect yourself, right? That multi-factor authentication is super important, and it's going to become just more important as we move forward in the future. Network segmentation, again, so this is how everything's set up in the background. So it's the architectural approach that divides the network into a couple different segments. So this allows administrators to control the flow of traffic and ensure that your critical infrastructure remains separate from, you know, less secure stuff, right? I always recommend that, you know, companies implement that 3-2-1-1 rule. And what that means is keep 3 or more copies in different locations, using 2 distinct storage mediums, and storing 1 copy off-site. I've already touched on this briefly, but the next one that I want to kind of talk about is make sure you're updating your systems, make sure you're patching. There's something called a common vulnerability and exposure, which is, you know, shortened to CVE. And what that is attackers, these things are published to help people protect themselves, but it's also very easy for these attackers to find these things, and they can run a quick scan of your guys' website and find any vulnerabilities if you haven't updated to the newest, you know, browser or network or, you know, whatever. Just making sure that you're patching and updating promptly is critically important to reducing your guys' cyber exposure. So that I already skipped down to policy governance. So if you take a look, that's the blue slide in the bottom corner. So I jumped ahead of myself there, guys. So this is more policies that are going to help protect you guys, right? So the next one I'm going to jump into is just under multi-factor authentication there, that blue one. So least privilege security architecture. So this is how your guys' organization set up. So the principle basically boils down to what information is essential for the individual who has this account. What does he need? So for instance, you know, should someone in sales have access to the finance data? Probably not. So if you set up your organization so each user only has access to the information that they need to perform their duty, that's going to help you guys, because you know, there's only a certain amount of information that they could expose if they actually fell victim to one of these attacks. And again, this closes, and I've already discussed, and you're going to hear it again, you know, this concept really ties into your organization's overall cybersecurity culture, right? And then the next one, we put it in red because it's the most important. And to be honest with you, you know, I'm not sure how many people have really thought about this as organizations, but as we continue to see this trend of more and more cyber attacks, you're going to really want to get this in place if you don't have it already. And that's an incident response plan. Okay. And this is the most important thing you can do to mitigate your risk. So, you know, a well-defined response plan includes, you know, preparation. So who internally, who externally is involved in the team when an event happens? What are the first steps and what responsibility does each stakeholder have? Number 2, detection and analysis. This phase triggers when you have had an event. So your organization needs to respond to it immediately. Okay, so There are many different types of attack. How do you respond to them? How proactive can you be? Is your IT architectural environment set up to respond to these things? Number 3, within that incident response plan, containment, eradication, and recovery. So this sets out, you know, next steps. Again, it determines that path forward. Do you give the threat actor the demands? Do you pay that ransom? Do you quickly restore from backups? This is your path, generally guided by questions such as, what's the potential damage to the business? Need for evidence preservation, service availability, time and resources needed to implement the strategy, duration of the solution. So how long is this going to take around? Can you set up a temporary workaround? These are all really, really big things that you can do. And then the last thing, before I turn it back to Ian for questions, is just regular testing. You know, any plan is only as good as the last time it was tested. So if you don't test, then there's no guarantee that you're really set up and ready for this attack, not if, but when it happens. So think about this as like a fire drill that we do as kids, right? We're going to continue to do these things. Now, you know, the next time you get one of these emails to refresh your memory or, you know, be aware of these cyber attacks, you know, I know it can sometimes be like, oh, I've got so much other stuff on your plate, but it is vitally important that you make sure you do it to keep up to date, right? Because we really, really need to keep on top of this, because these attacks, just like I said, have continued and doubled since 2020. I want to thank you guys for listening today. I'm going to turn it over to Ian. He's going to help you guys with any questions, but I really thank Charity Village for inviting us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Ian.
Thank you very much, Ben. And, you know, we all, I think collectively have to take a moment to breathe that sigh of, oh my goodness, the threat landscape out there for organizations of all shapes and sizes are really exposed to, you know, many things that we don't think about. And we're so passionate about driving, you know, our organizations, you know, strategic initiatives forward, that you're often blind to kind of what's happening out there that really has no impact or no strategic impact on your business, the business itself. And I think one of the elements I just want to comment on before we get into the Q&A is that some of the numbers that were presented, specifically the cost per record, $202 per record to respond, direct and indirect costs to respond to a breach. That's really agnostic of the type of organization that you're in. You could be a small nonprofit or you could be a large retail giant. Information, sensitive, confidential information is what threat actors are after. And whether it comes by way of a breach of a small nonprofit's database that has some of this information, or if it's a retail giant that has all this information on their customers. Fundamentally, the businesses are different, but the value of that private record remains constant. And that's the number one eye-opening thing. I think most people, specifically in smaller nonprofit organizations, realize it's like, holy smokes, there really is an exposure here. And like, we're just trying to carry forward our mandate to whatever that mandate might be. And Cooperators is to serve, you know, serve our insureds and protect our Canadian insureds and serve the communities that they operate within. And you know what? Fundamentally, it could happen to any or all of us. So you know, that is definitely a key takeaway that I have when I speak to anyone, that it really is impactful, that is applicable to everyone. You know, we encourage you to submit questions via the portal online, or submit them via the email address. And I'll just start kicking off on some of these questions here. And there's a couple common themes here that maybe I'll start with. So question is, what if our data is collected and stored by a third party secured site? And it could be PayPal, membership, you know, management, some third party vendor. It could be Salesforce comes up a lot. The question is, what coverage would a small nonprofit organization need, and would it extend to the third party breach? And would we be liable in that breach. So kind of what do we do in that situation? That's a great question. You know what? Fundamentally, it comes down to who's in care, custody, and control of the of the sensitive information when that information is breached. And in the case of this question, and again, like I caution this response with, it all depends on the circumstance and the nitty-gritty of the issue. And as an insurer, I'll say everything is subject to the terms and conditions and limitations of the coverage you have in place. However, generally speaking, when you're contracting out your services to a third party, the responsibility of care, custody, and control goes with that third party. And generally speaking, the contracts that you sign with a third-party vendor, whether it be Salesforce or whether it be PayPal or whomever it might be, or a managed service provider in the case of outsourcing your IT infrastructure, there's generally contractual elements within that service agreement that set out who is responsible for what. And clearly, in the case of a third-party vendor, they are responsible for ensuring the safekeeping of those records. Now, what can you do as a nonprofit organization to ensure that you're vetting everything effectively? One is contract review. You're wanting to make sure that you are, one, reviewing the right language within the contract itself. You would expect to have some hold harmless agreements. You would expect them to set out really who's responsible for what and how. That's number one. Number two, when you're dealing with a vendor, and it's interesting because we do this as well like cooperators. When we're dealing with third-party vendors, we have very strict requirements, insurance requirements to contract in with a third party. So as a nonprofit organization, if you're outsourcing part of your infrastructure or record keeping or whatever the case may be, you're well within your rights as part of that discussion and negotiation to ask what insurance they have in place, what type of, do they have cyber, what limits do they have, et cetera, and really dig into, asking the right questions about what will you do in the event there's a breach and my organization's sensitive data is breached. So that's number one. And you're generally pretty well protected if the contract language is right. Where you get a little bit of a gray area is as a board of a nonprofit association or a nonprofit organization or a charitable organization, the board has a mandate to carry, have the duty of care, duty of loyalty, the three duties to manage the affairs of the organization with the utmost care. And so whilst you could have a breach by a third party, and the breach notification costs, the first party costs to deal with the breach, will be borne and the responsibility of that third party. If the nonprofit or the organization that outsources that service has not done the proper due diligence in doing vendor selection, and there is financial harm to the stakeholders of which the nonprofit is responsible for, there could be a negligence claim brought against the organization for essentially negligence of managing the affairs of the organization and its sensitive information effectively. And that's where you get that third party element of coverage coming into play for cyber insurance. And it's really cyber event liability or privacy breach liability. It's the liability component associated with not managing the data effectively versus the cost to just notify, which is first party. So in this case of third party, outsourcing third party, the direct costs associated with dealing with the breach would not be a responsibility. But fundamentally, if you can't show that you've had the proper due diligence in vendor selection, you could find yourself liable. And that kind of leads me to the next part of that question. So what would a small nonprofit organization require from an insurance perspective? And that's where I really come back to the concept, and I think it was slide number 3 or 4, the breakout between third-party coverages and first-party coverages. Third-party being liability, first-party being cost reimbursement. Every cyber policy out there, generally speaking, like proper cyber policy, will have both third-party and first-party limits. And I would suggest that as a nonprofit organization, or really any organization for that matter, if you are outsourcing your services to a third party, you really want to ensure you've got that third party cyber liability coverage built into your into your coverage offering, and that will protect you from any type of liability suit. So while the outsourcing third party does reduce your exposure, it doesn't eliminate your exposure completely. Okay, so again, a little bit on the cost of the premium for a small nonprofit. So what is the normal cost of the premium for a small nonprofit organization? We purchased cyber in 2020 for $500 as an add-on to general liability. In 2021, it jumped to $4,000. We didn't get it. What Canadian companies have reasonable rates for small nonprofit organizations? Great question. And this question really comes back to slide 4 or 5 in the breakout of the anatomy of a cyber event. I think it's slide number 8, or actually not slide number 8. Sorry, the state of the market. And as the numbers were presented in state of the market, it's evident that exposures have increased over time significantly. Insurers are having a really difficult time globally, not just within Canada, but globally, keeping ahead of the curve of increased claims, increased exposures, and writing this business profitably. So we have seen an increase of rates, obviously. We've seen a depreciation or a reduction in limits offered, and we've just seen terms and conditions get much tougher to place. This is where working with a trusted insurance partner such as Cooperators is so important, because the proposition that Cooperators has put into place really sets you up for having a number of coverages that are available to you, very narrow in scope, right through a broad form application that can be bolted on to a comprehensive P&C policy. And it's done through the landscape of this proposition has been built very specifically for the risk appetite and the general clientele that Cooperators would generally operate within. And the benefit to that is you're able to secure the right type of coverage for very reasonable prices. And the commentary of it starting at 500 and going to 4,000, that is not unusual. We're seeing rate increases of multiples in this marketplace. But the proposition that's been put together for Cooperators, for the type of clientele that Cooperative services, ensure that sustainable long-term proposition is available, that affords our clients to access the right coverage at a reasonably appropriate price. And I would say, I don't have rates in front of me, but you're definitely working on the lower end of that range. And we want to make sure that we're there and available to support our insured and our insureds across the portfolio. And it is very important to ensure you have the right coverage for the right price, and Cooperators is there. And I think the bolt on to that, and this was a question as well, it's like, this sounds all great, this sounds wonderful, it's a little bit alarming. I'm a little taken aback. What are my next steps? Where do I go from here? And simply, the advice would be connect with your co-op advisor. They're well set up to start to have the dialogue associated with what to do. They can talk to you about the various options on insurance, the various coverages. They can help quantify what your exposure is and what the right limits that are available. Have those discussions, and they can walk you not only through the risk identification and mitigation elements, but also help you solution insurance placement to support the risk transfer. Okay. Should we be concerned about data in the cloud? Is this a problem? So again, I come back to it depends. If you are running your own cloud environment, absolutely, you should be concerned about it. It's no different than me dropping this memory stick on the subway and someone has access to all my data. If you were outsourced your cloud environment to a third party, assuming you have the right contracts in place and the hold harmless, you generally should be okay. But again, I would never recommend not buying any insurance and I'm not even talking about, I'm just saying in general, insurance is important. It's one element of a three-legged stool. You want to have some risk transfer in place, specifically on the liability side, to ensure that your interests are protected in the event that there's allegations that you didn't manage the affairs of the organization effectively. With cyber insurance, who determines the action specifically to cost payouts and ransom? So cyber insurance is interesting in the sense that when an event happens and your business is impacted, unlike a traditional insurance policy where you make a notification to your insurer and an adjuster gets involved, cyber works a little bit differently in the sense there's the introduction of a third party, and it's referred to as a privacy breach coach. And with any fit for purpose cyber policy, there's going to be a telephone number that comes along with that policy, which is your connection to your breach coach. And a breach coach is essentially that telephone number that you dial in when an event happens and you say, help, I have an issue. And they basically onboard you into the claim. They tell you immediately what you should and shouldn't do. They connect you with the right resources. They basically are the quarterback of the claim, and they help you manage what you need to do immediately. Turn this off, turn that off, get set up, and right through to engaging the right forensics teams, the right notification teams, and they work collaboratively with the insurer behind the scenes. And ultimately, it's about containing the event and ensuring you get back up online as quickly as possible with as minimal impact to reputation as you can. So that from that perspective, everything is handled behind the scenes by an independent third party that quarterbacks the entire plan. Okay. Could we get a sample incident response plan? So that's something that we're working on that we will furnish to all participants of this call shortly afterwards. When I say shortly afterwards, it'll probably be in the coming week. We're trying to get a template put together that is really fit for purpose for this stakeholder group around developing an incident response plan. And as you saw on the slides, an incident response plan presented by Ben can get quite complex, and we want to make sure that what we're providing to this stakeholder group is as most fit for purpose as it possibly can be, because you can get into very, very complex frameworks when it comes to incident response plans. And in fact, there's organizations in the US and actually globally that have certain frameworks that are set up to run with this. So what you guys would benefit from is really a micro version of what a large enterprise would have to run with. But fundamentally, it addresses the same conceptual ideas, just on a smaller scale. Okay, we're a small nonprofit. We have 10 laptops, not on a network, 4 different locations. We do not use online banking. We do not have sensitive member information digitally stored. Is our exposure lessened because of these factors? I mean, yeah, great question. Your exposure is minimized. However, I mean, at the end of the day, there was actually, it's a question that dovetails nicely into this. The whole comment around social engineering and what is CEO fraud. CEO fraud or business email compromise is simply a type of a social engineering threat whereby an email comes in purporting to be someone of authority, and it could go to a CEO who has ultimate or an executive director or someone, and that instruction is to transfer funds, is to pay a fraudulent invoice. It really could be anything. And so you don't necessarily in this case have sensitive information that will get breached, but the resources of the organization are there to carry the mandate of the organization forward. And so something as simple as a social engineering attack, which results in the fraudulent payment of an invoice or the fraudulent transfer of money from point A to point B, those unlawful and fraudulent. Those are the types of hiccups that you're going to experience through a cyber event that isn't specifically PII related, so a record specifically, but it is operational in nature, and a cyber policy definitely covers you for this. With cyber insurance coverage, I'm just mindful of time. I'll answer 2 more here. With cyber insurance coverage, who determines? Oh no, I did that one. Okay, is this being in any way paid by the cooperator? So I'm not sure what the question is in reference to. Maybe that came in when I was speaking to the incident, or with regard to the with a privacy breach coach. All of the work that is done to contain a claim or to contain a breach, to deal with a ransom event, to deal with any privacy event, and the quarterbacking by the breach coach. The breach coach is a service that comes hand in hand with the insurance policy. And that's really what you're paying for. You're paying for someone to help you when you're at your most vulnerable point, where you have a breach, you don't know what to do, you don't know who to call, you call a telephone number that's on the back of your cyber policy, and it's really the support there to help you navigate this very complex world and help you deal with things that you frankly just aren't prepared or overwhelmed, and you just don't have the subject matter expertise to deal with. And so all of the costs surrounding the quarterbacking of a claim is absorbed by a cyber insurance policy. Okay, so I think I've addressed pretty much everything. We're 1 minute left. Right, okay, so last thing. So the question was, is there anything that the cooperators is supported by this webinar? So to be clear, this presentation was put together really to talk about the risk exposures of nonprofit organizations, really any organization, but through the lens of nonprofit. And it's really there to serve as education as to what potentially could happen in this environment that we operate within. And the presentation, although we speak to some of the coverages that cooperators offers, fundamentally, we just want to make sure that Canadian businesses, Canadian charitable organizations, nonprofit organizations are properly protected. So if anything comes out of this from on a positive end, we are just hopeful that the information shared here can serve to educate around the realm of cyber insurance, or around the realm of cyber risk and mitigative techniques. It's meant to really start that conversation within your organizations. And should there be an opportunity where you would like to discuss insurance, you can reach out to your cooperator's representative. You can reach out to your regular insurance broker. Really, it's up to you to figure out how you want to move forward. But the purpose of this presentation is really to address that risk management and awareness element. And if we do nothing else but educate today, we are more than happy, and we felt we have done right by everyone on this call. So with that, I'd like to close off the call and say, thank you on behalf of cooperators and I guess Charity Village. Thank you for your time today. We are very passionate about this topic and helping our member organizations and organizations around the various geographies of Canada. And to the extent we can help you with navigating the stuff forward, absolutely, please do reach out. And we will be forwarding, Joel, I think, mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, we will be sending out the slide deck and some supporting documents to go along with it, so you can carry this forward within your organization and start to kick off these discussions about cyber risk and cyber risk management as appropriate. So thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice afternoon.
Thank you so much, Ian. Great job moderating those questions too, really appreciate it. All right, so as Ian mentioned, we are going to follow up later today with the webinar recording, so the full video recording and that slide deck. You'll have all of that together later today. You can go ahead and share that with your colleagues if you like. It's all publicly available. There will be a survey link as well, so you can fill out that, provide your feedback on today's webinar. We'll be sure to share that with our presenters. Once we do get some of that additional resources that Ian mentioned, we will make sure that that gets uploaded uploaded onto that recording page on our website. So please do go back and check that out later next week. Again, on behalf of Charity Village as well, we want to thank you for joining us today. I hope you'll join us for our next webinar, which is coming up in June, where we're going to discuss how to attract the next generation of donors. So you can find more information on that and all of our upcoming webinars at charityvillage.com/webinars. Thanks again for taking part today. I also wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.